Hey everyone, welcome to the Journey Home podcast. And today we are continuing in our series, Advice to My Younger Self. And the advice that I want to share with you today is this: choose your heroes wisely. Choose your heroes wisely. And when I use that word heroes, I really just mean, someone that we look up to, someone that we admire, someone who is a role model to us, leaders that we follow, even leaders that we might not be close, in proximity with, but maybe we read their books or follow their podcasts or whatever, just anyone that we allow to have influence over us. And so, um, that's what I'm talking about. I'm not talking about idolatry or, putting someone on a pedestal or worshiping, another human being. We are called to only worship God and God alone. And so, hopefully that makes sense. Yeah, I'm just talking about that normal tendency, that normal human tendency that we have to um, really to look for role models. And I think obviously there's unhealthy ways we can do that, but I don't think it's inherently bad in and of itself. Um, I've mentioned a book previously on this podcast called The Critical Journey, and one of they just talk about the different stages that a person will go through in their spiritual development. And one of the stages, which again is very normal, it's healthy, it's everyone is going to go through it, is that you want to be connected not just with right belief, but with the right community, community that shares what you believe is a right belief. And so um, obviously leaders are a big part of any community. And so that is a normal need of human beings. It's a normal stage of spiritual development, even. But of course, you will come to a place where you realize, okay, maybe I did, put too much of, find too much identity in being connected to a certain group or being attached to a certain leader. And then you have to kind of, reassess that and go from there. Um, and you might also come to a realization that, oh, maybe I was following the wrong leader or esteeming the wrong kind of leader. And that's also a normal part of your spiritual development. But my point in just saying this in the introduction here is just that it's not, you know, it's not wrong to look to human leaders, though, of course, we always want to be wary of idolizing them, right? But it's not wrong to look to human leaders. I mean, God has given us human leaders, and they are a part of, His provision for us. They're not everything, but we don't want to just throw them away just because we've seen bad examples of leaders in our lives. Um, so one principle that is woven throughout the scriptures is this idea that God's ways are not our ways, right? His kingdom looks so different than our earthly kingdoms and what we might associate with a kingdom. Some have even used the phrase, it's an inside outside upside down kingdom, right? In many ways, um, the things that God values seem so backwards compared to the things that this world seems to value. And one of the ways that Jesus articulated this idea that I'm talking about, this principle, in Luke 16, verse 15, it says, He told them, You are the ones who justify yourselves in the sight of others, but God knows your hearts. For what is highly admired by people is revolting in God's sight. So it's not just that, um, we like vanilla ice cream and God likes chocolate ice cream, and they're both, good flavors, but we just, have different preferences. No, it's not a matter of just a difference in preference. Jesus is actually saying some of the things that we esteem, that we admire, it's not just that God disagrees, he finds it revolting, right? He despises it, other translations say. And so that should jar all of us and cause us to want to examine ourselves and ask ourselves that question, do I esteem what God esteems, and do I despise what God despises? Or another way to say it is, do I love what God loves, and do I hate what God hates, right? Um, so that reality, again, that God's ways are just different from our ways, right? That it plays out in so many areas. But of course, it plays out for sure in the types of people that we admire, or the types of leaders that we want to follow. And I don't know about you guys, but I've definitely seen in my own life, and I feel like I've observed it in the church at large too, that we do have this tendency um, to, at times, gravitate toward the wrong kinds of leaders, or certain kinds of leaders. And we have a tendency sometimes to esteem that which God does not esteem. And so there's, many examples that I could give you, but let me just give you some examples from the life of the Apostle Paul, just to illustrate how this can play out. Okay, um, so if you're familiar, one of the churches that the Apostle Paul planted was in the city of Corinth. And so in the Bible, we have a couple of the letters that he wrote to that church, to the people in Corinth. It's called First and Second Corinthians. Um, and for the Corinthians, again, the Apostle Paul, he's the one who brought them the gospel. He introduced them to Jesus. He baptized some of them, not all of them, but some of them. And he is their spiritual father. He's the one who really brought them into a relationship with Jesus. And so, he, rightly so, should be esteemed by this community. And um, but we see that over time, what happens is these other teachers, and Paul will call them false teachers, even false apostles, but they begin to infiltrate the community. They begin to influence the community. And as a part of that, they really try to draw the people to follow them, and instead of following the leadership of the Apostle Paul. And one of the ways they do that, I mean, they're undermining him. They're saying all kinds of negative things about him, criticizing Paul, behind his back. And in the book that we know as Second Corinthians, Paul directly begins to address this challenge, this the influence of these quote unquote super apostles, right? And primarily where that happens, it's sprinkled throughout the letters, but primarily where that happens is Second Corinthians chapters 10 through 12. And so we see the Apostle Paul begin to give us a little insight into what is going on here, what's happening. And again, this isn't meant to be a comprehensive unpacking of who these super apostles were and what they were doing exactly, but I'll just give you a few highlights. But one of the characteristics of these, again, these quote unquote super apostles, I don't know if that's what they called themselves, or just a name that the Apostle Paul came up with for them. Obviously, he's being sarcastic. But, these super apostles, one of the characteristics to describe them is that they are kind of impressive they are kind of impressive outwardly, right? And so, from what Paul writes in this letter, what we can glean is that, they seem to be pretty articulate in their speech. They seem to have a decent number of followers, and they even have, maybe what we can describe as, strong personalities or bold personalities. And these are a few of the characteristics that, perhaps attracted the Corinthian church to them. And it's not just that, but at the same time, these super apostles, who are actually false apostles, they're kind of undermining Paul for kind of being the opposite, or, or for not having those qualities, because I guess apparently the Apostle Paul wasn't a great preacher, and Paul even admits that in the letter. He wasn't a trained speaker. And so maybe he wasn't the most articulate, again, public speaker. Um, and they even criticized the way he treated them when he was with them. You know, they were very bold, with them, but the Apostle Paul, by contrast, was very meek and gentle with them. And these super apostles actually used that as a criticism against Paul. They said, in his letters, he talks tough, he writes so boldly, but when he's with you in person, he's very gentle and meek, and it's just funny that they would use that as a criticism because, if you're familiar with the Beatitudes that Jesus taught, one of the things that he commanded was meekness. Blessed are the meek, for they shall inherit the earth. And, gentleness is a fruit of the Spirit, as the Apostle Paul would teach us in another one of his letters, and so these are qualities that we should be looking for as leaders, and yet, for some reason we are drawn to, those who are impressive outwardly, right? And just to be clear, there's nothing wrong with that in itself, but my point is, there's nothing wrong with being articulate in speech. There's nothing wrong with, having a strong personality. That's not the point here. But the point is that alone is not what qualifies someone to be a spiritual leader, right? Or to have spiritual authority. The Apostle Paul says this in 2 Corinthians 11, verse 19, really just correcting the Corinthians. He's saying, for you, being so wise, gladly put up with fools. In fact, you put up with it if someone enslaves you, if someone exploits you, if someone takes advantage of you, if someone is arrogant toward you, if someone slaps you in the face. I say this to our shame. We have been too weak for that. And obviously he's being sarcastic again because, again, this is the criticism that's being leveled at him, that the Apostle Paul, he's so weak. And their definition of weakness is that, he's gentle with you. He's meek when he's with you in person. That's, in their eyes, that's weak. Whereas I think the Apostle Paul would argue, and I would argue, is it sounds like they're trying to be like Jesus, honestly. But anyway, Paul's point here is that these Corinthians are tolerating leaders that at the end of the day treat them pretty terribly, right? I don't know if he means that they're literally slapping them in the face, or maybe he's just, it's just a figure of speech. I don't know. But the point is that they are, it's one thing to have a bold personality or strong personality, but it's another to be abusive, right? And, the Apostle Paul, at least in part of that passage I just read, he's talking about the way that these leaders treat you. And his point is they're arrogant toward you. They're slapping you in the face, and you're putting up with that. That's, the way the leaders treat them, that's on them. But, the fact that the Corinthians would tolerate this and be drawn to leaders like that, that's on them, and Paul's saying, you're tolerating this. You're letting them treat you like this, and you're choosing to follow them. And, that might sound crazy to us, but, I think sadly, history shows, and even recent events in the church have shown that the church today still, we continue to not just tolerate, but put up with, and we are drawn to, and we promote leaders who treat people like this. And maybe some of them do it out in the open. Maybe some of them only do it behind closed doors, but, when few eyes are looking. But the point is, we continue to esteem leaders who treat people in a very un-Christ-like manner. And so, we really need to be more discerning in that. And then another of the things that another one of the ways that the Apostle Paul describes these super apostles in that, again, that same passage I just read, is that they're enslaving you, they're exploiting you, they're taking advantage of you. And I don't know all the ways that they were exploiting or taking advantage, but one of the ways that the Apostle Paul definitely talks about in this letter uh, is is in financial gain, but also just overall. It seems that the relationship between these super apostles and the Corinthians are, it's more about what these apostles can get from the Corinthians rather than what the Corinthians are getting from them, And again, it doesn't mean it's wrong to financially support a minister or a leader. I mean, the Apostle Paul in other letters, I mean, he says it very clearly, like those who preach the gospel, they have a right to make their living from the gospel. But at the same time, it shouldn't be a burden, right? People shouldn't feel like they're being exploited or taking advantage of financially or in any other way, And the Apostle Paul really takes this to the extreme, to the point where he doesn't want to charge the Corinthians anything for their ministry. Again, not because he's opposed to that, because again, he's in other letters, he makes it very clear, like he believes that it's right to financially support ministers of the gospel. But for some reason, with certain churches, and he actually says he's receiving support from other churches in Macedonia in order to be able to minister to the Corinthians free of charge. So again, he's not opposed to receiving financial support, but for whatever reason in this, toward the Corinthians particularly, he does not want to be a burden to them, and he does not want to charge them, financially for his ministry. And, um, you know, so that's a direct application, but then there's a bigger principle, I think, that the Apostle Paul is demonstrating, which he also talks about in the letter, which is that if he is a spiritual father to them, then he said it's not the job of children to support their parents. It's the job of the parents to bless the children, right? And he doesn't want to be a burden to them to the degree that he's willing to take the burden on himself to not just minister to them, but figure out how to pay for it also. And so, the big point is he wants to be a blessing to the Corinthians. He's not looking for what he can get out of them. And that is, stands in direct contrast to the way that these super apostles are treating them. Um, and so again, my point here is not to give a comprehensive list of, all the different things we should look for, or warning signs that we should look for, in who not to admire and who to admire, right? It's just to give a few examples just to get get you thinking about it. But my main point is this: just like the Corinthians, we all, because we're human beings, we have a tendency to admire leaders or admire just people, right? Heroes, as I used the word earlier, that we really shouldn't, and so, are we looking to those who are demonstrating the fruit of the Spirit? Like miracle signs and wonders, those are fantastic, and I believe in those 100%. But Jesus is actually pretty clear, like there's gonna be people in the end who will do all of those things, and yet they don't have the character of Christ. They don't actually walk in an intimate relationship with him. He's going to actually say to some, "Depart from me, I never knew you," even though they actually did all these awesome things. And so again, those things are good. I'm not saying throw them away, but those alone are not the full criteria for someone that we should raise up as a leader or just even admire. Are we looking to people who demonstrate the character of Christ, the fruit of the Spirit? How do they treat people? I mean, just as a simple barometer, right? How do they treat people? Another thing, yeah, is that are they looking to promote themselves? Are they looking for what they can get from you or what they can get out of their followers? Or are they seeking to build and to sacrifice and to build up the church, to lay their lives down for the sake of the gospel, right? Are they sacrificing? Again, it's not a comprehensive list, but these are just some of the things that I'm looking for um, in a leader or in someone that I'm gonna, admire or look to as a role model. And I don't know if this needs to be said, but it's not about finding the perfect person, because they don't exist other than God and Jesus. Like the perfect leader doesn't exist. We're all gonna stumble in many ways, and so that's one thing I look for too. It's not a leader who is fully arrived, but one who is on a journey and recognizes they're on a journey and is willing to repent when they stumble, when they fall short. I think that's another great sign of a leader and of someone that we should esteem as a role model, right? And so, um, yeah, again, these are just some thoughts for you, but again, the advice that I want to leave you with is choose your heroes carefully. Choose your heroes carefully. Wisely. Choose your heroes wisely. Um, so yeah, I hope that this has been helpful. Hope it stirred some thoughts in you. And yeah, thanks again for listening. We are going to take a quick break for the Thanksgiving holiday, but we'll be back with new episodes at the beginning of December. So have a great holiday. Again, thank you for listening, and we'll see you next time. God bless you.